Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to another Breaking into Data session. I'm Aaron Fallouse, founder and CEO of Promotable, also your host for tonight for Breaking into Data. Before we dive into our session today, a couple of quick announcements. Today is going to be a little bit more interactive than usual, so I encourage everyone, if you've got questions, please drop them into the chat, put them into the question section, or also feel free to raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and give you you share the stage. And with that, these Breaking into Data sessions, Promotable, who are we? We are a workforce accelerator closing the data skills gap. How do we do that? We start with sessions like this. We bring in data and business experts and leaders to help you cut through the buzzwords and really learn how to learn enough about data to make data-driven decisions and really do what you need to get done. And for those of you who want to dive deeper, Promotable also offers a data science accelerator course. This is an immersive income share agreement backed course. And really, we do all of the things to get you in the room. So not only do we have amazing instructors who are current practitioners, but we provide mentors, projects with our partners. So you've got something that's not a passion project, but actually real experience. And of course, we're partnered with 1871. So a lot of really cool people that you can connect with to kind of get those extra insights that you can't ordinarily get from just reaching out to people. So with that, I'd love to introduce Paulina Ozals. So this is going to be a really great talk. I think understanding how to use a dashboard is something that is so critical, because if you mess that part up, then everything you've done doesn't really matter anymore. So she's a manager on the Lighthouse advisory side of Digital Lighthouse. I totally butchered that, so I'm so sorry. But she's going to tell you all about herself and what she does, and then we'll hand it off. Thanks, Pauline.
Thanks, Aaron, for the introduction. Nice to meet everyone, albeit virtually. I'm from Chicago. I think it's a great city. If you've ever heard, it's the biggest little city, and that holds true. It's really nice to network with people. So hopefully in the near future, we'll have the opportunity to do this in person. But the virtual environment, I've learned, has offered the opportunity for folks far from Chicago to join. I've heard we have some people from Toronto on the line, California, so welcome. As Aaron shared, I work for KPMG. We are a consulting firm. We have a lot of different advisory services, and one of those is called Digital Lighthouse. So I'm part of a team of data scientists, modelers, data visualization, enterprise data management, integration, low code, kind of you name it. It's pretty broad, but that's what Digital Lighthouse is all about. I chose consulting because I have the opportunity to work with a lot of different clients, a lot of different industries, challenges, and tools. And from that experience, I was able to connect with Aaron and introduce you to data visualization. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of a good dashboard, which is really going to be about how we go about developing a dashboard, and then some basic principles of design. So before jumping into the presentation, just wanted to get a sense for the audience. Anyone here currently create dashboards for their organization, or some folks studying different data visualization tools or techniques?
First question in. Let's put a poll here. Lots of yeses.
Awesome.
Yeah, so about 75-25. And then, well, awesome.
Cool. Well, good. I'm glad we have some experienced dashboarders. As Aaron shared, I want to make this interactive. No one wants to hear a single speaker drone on for 20 minutes. So feel free to pop up questions, share comments. Aaron will help me kind of monitor the chat, and we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So with that, let me share my screen. Everyone see okay? All right. So this evening, we'll talk a little bit about our approach to dashboarding, some tools, of course, the data, the whole purpose we create dashboards, some basic principles of design, and then, as I shared, we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So we always follow essentially a 4-step approach to developing dashboards. And we'll spend some time really talking about the first 3. In this presentation, we won't really get into deployment and maintenance. But any type of dashboard or report that you're creating, from the very simplistic to the more interactive visualizations, are generally going to follow these 4 steps. So we always start off with a plan, and it sounds super basic, but can't even tell you how many clients I work with where they are developing thousands of reports on a month. They have people committed full-time just to running and generating reports that are sometimes all very similar. And I think that occurs a lot because someone just says, I need this report, and someone just goes off and makes it. There's not often time spent building that initial plan. So there's a couple components. First thing is to understand the challenges that your report or your dashboard is going to overcome. What are they trying to achieve with this? What are the pain points? The more business pain points or value that you can cover in your dashboard, the more powerful and beneficial and used that it's going to be. And then you want to obtain agreement and approval. And depending on the formality and the size of your organization or who you're creating this for, that may be a more formal process. But you always want to have a green light that, hey, I have this business case to go ahead and develop this dashboard, and make sure you get the thumbs up from the powers that be within your organization. Then you really want to spend time understanding your user groups and how they're going to be using the dashboard. So, for example, if you're going to create it for the finance organization, well, who within finance? Is it people in accounts receivable or accounts payable? Is it credits and collections? Is it risk? Understand the different individuals that are going to be using it. And how they're going to share it. Are they going to send it off, to their boss? How will they use it? So uncover all of those end user groups. And then again, how they're going to be using that report. Is it just for them to assess the business process? Does it ultimately go to the board or to a regulatory report? So it's really important you have an idea of its use cases. Then if you're developing a report for any business process, let's say you work in a reporting and analytics center of excellence, or you're an analyst or visualization expert, not for a specific function, you may be totally foreign to the business processes. And if you go into creating a dashboard where you have no concept of the business processes, even just from a very high level, you're really going to have to learn 2 things as you create the dashboard, right? Like how it's going to be used in those specific processes and the dashboard technique. So it just creates an extra challenge if you don't at least have that foundation of the business process. You don't by any means need to become an expert, but at least start to get an idea of what the process is and how the dashboard relates and some of the key data points that they use throughout that business process. All that information gets summarized into a nice requirements documentation, right? You have a very clear scope. This will save you a lot of headaches down the line. If someone says, well, wait, what about this? You can always go back to your initial documentation and say, well, we had these conversations and it was agreed upon that the scope is A, B, and C for this particular report or dashboard. It should have a very clear, objective, what you're going to accomplish through the report or the dashboard, and then always try to align it to the strategic goals, whether that be within the business function or at the enterprise level. It's going to depend on who you're creating the report and dashboard for. But that just really helps make it valuable to the business and make sure that your dashboard and report gets used and maintained. Again, can't tell you how many times we hear of reports being created and they're no longer even used by the end user it was intended for. But so when you can align it to strategic goals, it makes it that much more valuable. We found as KPMG, since we have the opportunity to do this for a lot of different clients, that it's really a struggle for your dashboard to remain relevant and actively used when you have that lack of upfront planning and sponsorship. So definitely encourage, even though this is not like the glamorous technical things, to take the time to go through this planning step. So once you have your plan, the high-level idea of what you're going to do, who's it for, you have approval, you're now going to get into the nitty-gritty and start to gather your requirements. And before you go into that, I would take some time to look at old reports just so you have a better basis of what your end users are working with today. Maybe they just have an Excel document. Maybe they just have like a canned report from an ERP, but take the time to look at the fields. And then as you conduct those in interviews, find out the questions they want answered in the report. And again, how they're going to use it. When you're doing the planning, you're doing that at a very high level. Now, when you get into the interviews, you have the opportunity to sit face-to-face, potentially with the person who's going to be using this report day in and day out, or whatever the cadence is. And they may have a little bit of different perspective. Conducting the interviews, again, it depends on who you're building the report for. Obviously, if it's going to go to like an executive, you are not going to get their time. You're going to hear from someone else. Or if it's used by a large user group, maybe you do like a group interview. I'm by no means suggesting that you have to interview every single person, one-on-one. You have to structure it however it makes sense for your plan. As you're doing those interviews, you're definitely going to talk about specific fields. You're going to talk about KPIs or metrics that they may need calculated. You're going to understand the level of granularity and how much they want to drill into certain fields or calculations. Again, that's an opportunity you have as a visualization professional to help them maybe narrow down the fields. I've had a client that wanted to put 300 fields in a just static report. As we all know, that would be very difficult to read. So you may have to provide some guidance as you understand the fields they want. As you think about KPIs or metrics in the back of your mind, you may also be realizing it's going to create a lot of different sources to do those calculations, or even add complexity as you go to try to build out the dashboard if they have some really specific, again, calculations that they want to do. So we talk about frequency, and frequency is just how often we're going to be pulling this report. Is it something that they're going to look at once a day, once a week, once a month, quarterly, annually, whatever it may be? But frequency is important because you want your data, obviously, to be fresh when they go ahead and pull that report. A lot of people want real-time, right? Real-time data. It's how we live, right? I make a deposit in my bank account. I literally see it, a minute later. I buy something, I get an email a second later. So as a society, we're very used to real-time data. In an enterprise, when you go to build a report, doing that can become really expensive because potentially a large amount of data has to move through your entire technical landscape to end up on this report. So when someone says, well, I want like real time, dig into the frequency a little bit more, understand the justification for that. If you're building a report for like cybersecurity, they are literally going to watch data stream, right? There are people who absolutely need real-time data. Other functions, it's not so much. And then format. Do they expect to just pull up this report on their laptop? Are they going to, want to see this report on their phone? Are they going to look at it on a tablet? I mean, good news is today that most tools are super flexible, and format is not as significant as it was a few years ago. But, if you do have to think about optimizing something for mobile, you want to be conscious that someone isn't sitting there like scrolling down on their phone to actually see what they want to see in the report. At this point, you've probably really just talked to people within the business organization. You might not have interacted with any technical professionals. So now as you gather requirements, this is also the opportunity that you connect with your partners in IT. They can help you get the data into the tool that you're going to use. They can also help make sure that it's refreshed at the frequency that you need. They can potentially help if there's any errors and help with maintenance and deployment. So definitely want to find, your IT counterparts in this process. And it's probably more than one person. And if you work at a big company, it can be a bit of a headache, but promise kind of well worth it, especially if it's a report for a senior person within your organization. They want to go and pull up the report on their phone, have zero issues. And that means that you have to be in sync between the business and IT. All of that work is going to lead into a design document. And if you are, making something more complex, obviously that design document is going to be more and more detailed than a report where maybe we're just pulling different fields in and out and doing some basic charting. But you should have a very specific and comprehensive plan by the end of this process. You may hear the term functional specifications, which is all the input from the business. And then those sometimes get translated into the technical specifications for the more tech-savvy folks to actually go and build the report. Again, from KPMG's experience, key to dashboard success is spending that time invested to really clearly understand what the end user needs prior to going and spending your time building this report. So I've covered 2 steps in our approach so far. I've shared a lot of information fairly quickly. Are there any questions? And since I'm sharing my screen, Aaron, if you could help throw them out, that would be great.
Yep. Folks, anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, put something in the question section, or go ahead and drop it into the chat as well, and we'll get your question answered. Well, I think we can go ahead and move on, and then if anyone had a question, then we'll just get to it once it comes in. Here we go. So James asked if this is a process that's applicable. Is it industry specific, or maybe company size specific, or is it applicable across the board?
Applicable across the board.
Awesome.
I'd say the time it takes you to go through this process is going to increase. The bigger the company, the more complex the dashboard you're creating. But the plan and gather steps, same no matter what industry, company size you're doing this for.
And then, here we go. What next question came in? What key data points should you aim for when you're conducting interviews?
I mean, it really depends on who you are building this for. It's going to totally vary. So I don't know if that's a question around like specific fields. But that's why you want to understand the business process and the end user that you're going to be using it for. So if they start rattling stuff off and you're like, why do you need that? You can at least have that in the back of your mind to gently ask why that's a critical field for them. But the fields, the data points that are part of a report are really going to vary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the feedback that I think that we've got from the last couple of minutes of your presentation is understand your stakeholder, potentially pushback is the wrong word, but ask some more detailed questions as to why something is important, because oftentimes what comes up a lot, at least in our events, is sometimes the questions that they ask or the things they tell you they need aren't necessarily what they really need, and sometimes you have to dive deeper into that. Okay, Robin asked, how does a design document relate to agile development?
Agile is a methodology you're going to use to go and build, right? So whether you're following waterfall, agile, scaled agile, that's just how you're going to go through this process and pass it off to the development team. That's just the cadence. So the design document you're going to need before you kind of go in that next step. So let's say like my first sprint is, all right, I'm going to go through the gather requirements step. My sprint's like 2 weeks. Sprint 2, is going and building it, and then maybe you move on to the other team and go through this process again. So these steps should work no matter what methodology you're following to go and actually build the report, if that makes sense.
Awesome. A few more questions. So Brandon asked a really good question. He asked if is it typically the responsibility of only one person, or is there typically a team? And if so, who are involved in making a dashboard?
Again, I'll say it depends on, I hate saying depends, but it's true. It kind of depends on, again, the complexity, the size of the organization. If you're having to build like 30 reports, 100% you're going to have a team of people that are going through this planning and gathering requirements stage. You're going to have people that are just essentially like business people doing a lot of that. They understand the business process and maybe have a basis in technology. Then you're going to partner with the IT organization, again, because that data is going to have to move through your ecosystem. So you need to understand, the source systems that it's coming through, the integration layers, all the way to where it needs to end up on potentially, and why that might be slower than the user wants. And so I'd say like an enterprise architect or data architect can guide you through that and help you accomplish what you need to.
Yeah.
The other person on the team is going to be like your visualization person, right? They know the tool that you're going to go and build this report in. So during your planning, you should already have the tool identified, right? You don't go through this process and then pick the tool. You typically have a BI or business analytics tool already at your organization. And so that's the other member of the team, right? Is the person that's like, I am the Tableau expert, I am the ThoughtSpot expert, whatever tool they're using. And then you'll probably also need someone on the team. Again, if you're building a lot of reports that are more complex or the business users are like brand new, that can help do your training, your literacy. Sometimes the person that develops the report is a great individual to do that because they understand all the functionality of the tool. They've been part of the process. They've seen the documentation. Sometimes those individuals are just way too technical to be able to relay it in layman's terms to the business. So I'd say that's the other person you may need, is to say, hey, business, like, thanks for your time. We've developed the report. It's live. Here you go. And if it's a brand new tool, like, they're going to need to know, okay, how do I access it? How do I play with these functions? Who do I go to if I have an issue? So all those things.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, I mean, it's very different if you're at like, I don't know, a Series A startup of like 50 to 100 people versus what you're talking about. Because I feel like that gets in a lot of like data visualization classes, which is ironic given that we're in EdTech. But I feel like we often downplay like what it means to build a dashboard, because we're like, oh, all you need is Tableau or your BI solution. We don't talk about, because I like that Brandon asked, is it beyond data analysts? And yeah, you know, if you're going to have to pull, if you don't have a data pipeline to bring in your stuff, you're going to be working with data engineering with someone else on the IT side. So it definitely can become more complex than just throw up Tableau and call it a day.
For sure. Yeah, I see clients all the time that just like, oh, we bought a tool and it's going to solve world hunger. Like, no, you haven't addressed your data. You haven't talked about the business needs at all. But yeah, it's really different at like a smaller company versus a very large organization, right? Where if you just think about any consulting firm, right, we tend to work with bigger, more complex organizations, which is why my point of view is probably skewed towards that. But I know the question came up earlier, you know, is this like industry agnostic, company agnostic? I mean, yes, like you would still go through these steps at some level of formality, no matter what.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And then we've got 3 more, so we can either save these till the end or we can keep going.
I mean, I'm cool. I like questions. So we can, if they relate, we'll keep going. If I think I'm going to address them, I'll put a hold on them.
Okay, well, I'll go through them and then feel free to decide if we want to come back to them later or if we get to them now. So Lauren asked, how do you ask the customer or get the customer to tell you what they want from the dashboard if they're not sure? So kind of like you don't know what you don't know kind of situation. And how do you deal with that situation? I'm sure that comes up a lot with what you're doing with your...
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have to like read through the gray when they're like, I say complaining, when they articulate like what problem they're having, like why are we going to build this dashboard in the first place, right? Like maybe they're having to take 3 different Excel files and do calculations, and then the data is really stale, and it's obviously annoying to connect from a bunch of different files. So when you just start to talk to them in those interview sessions, like in the planning phase, and get a sense of what you're trying to solve, that will tee you up for understanding better the specific questions you need to ask in the specific fields you want to obtain. So in that planning stage, that's why we say understand why you're creating this dashboard, right? That is the business problem or pain point. They're not going to tell you the specific fields, but they're going to say, well, like, I can't, calculate this because I have to go request the data from this person, and then I have to, again, use a bunch of different files to calculate it, and then my answer is different from this person's answer. So that's your basis. Again, before conducting interviews, you should also take a look at some reports they've been using. That'll give you a good foundation in some of the fields that they've been looking at. And then you should also already have a good understanding of the business process before you go into interviews as well, right? So if someone says, well, I need to know like who hasn't paid their bill in like 30, 60, 90 days, like get a sense of that credit and collections process. And you can always ask them, like, take me through, what do you do? Like you go to figure that out. What is step 1? What are some of the fields you look for at that point? Okay, what do you do next? Now what information do you need? And as you ask those guiding questions, it'll start to surface. The other thing I'd highly recommend is that you have some sort of business documentation before you start the gather requirements process, so you can be sure you collect everything. So that functional design or that functional specification that I mentioned, that is typically like a very business language document that kind of guides through, all right, what fields we want to see, who's it going to, and that can help as well. So, yeah, good question. I hope that helped.
No, I mean, I'll just tack on, because I made the last part where Lauren mentioned that some of her customers or clients will say things like, we'll let the data tell us what it can tell us. But I think what you articulated was ask what the business question is, because otherwise I've seen the same thing, Lauren, where I've had someone come to me and say, like, Aaron, I just want to know if I should be using a different tool. And this person, like they bought Tableau and they were just reporting stuff to report it. But there was no question at all. And like, if you have no question, you're not going to find an answer. And that's probably going to be, So I would, if you can, push back a little bit and ask what they want to find from the data, if anything. Because if the answer is nothing, then that's a different kind of question. Next question. Reed asks, what's the average length of time from start to finish for the process that you've kind of gone through?
For planning and gathering requirements, I'd say it's it's pretty quick. Maybe a couple weeks at most. Again, it kind of depends on like the size of the organization you're working through and the number of people that you need to talk to get your plan approved, and also the end users. But once you kind of have that plan set and stakeholders identified, then the gather requirements is definitely pretty quick. So of these two steps so far, planning is going to take more time because there are probably multiple people that need to agree. And then the gather requirements piece, maybe like a week or two, right? Because you'll do the initial interviews and you'll put some information together, and then you'll go and just review and validate that with the folks that you talk to. And then when they're like, yeah, this looks good, then you can go and start doing your build. So these two steps don't take too much time.
Cool. And then last question on this topic, Chandler, kind of similar to an earlier question of how do you handle clients or stakeholders who aren't sure what they want, in the sense that they might have a list of KPIs that they think they need, but they don't know how the dashboard is going to be used, or how granular or how deep it needs to be. Is that a question of just asking more, or how do you suggest that Chandler addresses these kinds of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, try to prompt and dig deeper. I mean, you have to remember, like, people are just used to working the way they're working, and now you're coming in and changing, right? Like, typically someone else, maybe their boss has said, like, we're getting off Excel, we're going to Tableau, and people freak out. They're like, I'm used to downloading Excel on my laptop, and I just pull what I need to pull, and it's change, and change is frightening to some extent for everyone. And so I think if you go in and iterate, like, this is here to help you, here's how we're going to improve the process, here's how we're just going to make your work life easier, that's always a great basis. And then when they start to talk about the report and the fields they need, that's where you, again, need to provide your design expertise and guiding those questions to be like, well, for example, my client that was like, I need 300 reports in this field. Like, that's, a lot of fields. If we're looking at that, it's going to be really difficult to read. What are maybe some of the core fields you need? And then keep in mind, we can always add in information. You have that option to pull in additional fields. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, I really want to look at this. And then it's nice to have access to this additional data as well. And then it was like, great, I can just create a report that has these, X number of fields. But don't worry, the tool has the functionality for you to pull in more information if you need it, or to slice and dice information, if you need it. And again, so many people are used to like working off Excel, which doesn't have the functionality of a lot of these tools. That's also why they're like, just take my Excel report and put it in Tableau. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Now we can do it a little differently, and the tool functionality is going to allow you to kind of see and drill how you want. So sorry, that's not like a great crystal clear answer, but you'll just get used to asking questions. The more you go through the process, or the more you work with a similar function and understand the business process, like, the easier it's going to be. If you are in that function, I think it's a lot easier than if you are in like a analytics COE and you have to come in and work with like supply chain and you've never talked to them before. So it comes with time, but again, if you have that good specifications document ahead of starting these things, that's always really helpful. And then to just educate along the way and be empathetic to change along the way too. Usually it can go through pretty smoothly. And frankly, most people are also like excited to use like the new BI tool that's been acquired. So participation is usually not an issue in this stage.
Awesome. We've got one more question, but kind of mindful of time. I want to make sure you have time to go through the rest of the stuff, and then we'll get to that last question after your next question break.
Okay. I will move it along then. So tools. There's loads of tools out there. I go to clients all the time who have multiple tools, and some people are using this and some people are using that. Some people think oh, the tool is going to be the answer. Like Aaron, I think you and someone else brought up that point. Not the case. I also think as a visualization professional, it is very difficult to know very well all of these tools. So most people know like Tableau and Power BI. They've just been out forever. I think if you know a tool really well, it's fairly easy to kind of pick up and learn a new tool pretty quickly. But don't stress yourself out and try to learn everything about every single tool. You'll go nuts, and it changes all the time. I'd also encourage, if you're working with an organization and they're looking for a new tool because they think it's going to solve the reporting or analytical capabilities, to encourage them to take a step back, talk about the problem, find that root of the problem before they invest in a new tool. Two things to keep in mind is that we have business intelligence tools, we have business analytics tools. Business intelligence tools are telling us, like, here's what happened, right? My sales last week were X. Business analytics tools are starting to use, machine learning and being more predictive and telling you what will happen, which is, I think, a cool new trend. It's making data science more accessible to the masses. It's making these things much easier to use. Like ThoughtSpot is one that I know uses a lot of machine learning in its capabilities. So probably not going to be like a huge factor if you're part of the process to evaluate a tool, but just something to keep in mind. The main thing that I encounter is a hesitancy to shift from Excel. Everyone has used Excel for decades. They've gotten very comfortable with it. We see all the time people will download data and put it on their desktop. I worked with a client where one person on their desktop had like 30 very critical reports, just this guy. So we want to shift away from the stale data, shift away from like the hoarding of reports, get people to use these more interactive tools that we can more easily share, and we can have fresher data than downloading into Excel. Definitely one thing to keep in mind, and probably not going to be an issue, especially if you're working with a tool that's in kind of that Gartner leader quadrant, is integration. So if you think about all the different sources where data can come from before it ends up on a report or dashboard, you may want to look for tools that have compatibility, right? Just look at the APIs or open APIs, make sure that you can get it connected to the report. And if you have like no clue what that is, that's where your IT partners can come into play. And where if you're going to help an organization pick a new tool, you want to make sure they're part of the conversation. So it fits into that end-to-end architecture. It kind of plays nice with other tools that are part of that. My kind of last point around tools is that when we've created things for executives, so VPs or SVPs or C-suite, they're not going to care that it's built off of Tableau versus ClickView. They probably, if you're at a big company, are not even going to be part of these demos and part of the tool selection process, right? There's a budget for these tools and someone else makes the decision. So if you're having to build a tool for an executive, I'd say just make sure it has the functionality that they're looking for. Again, if you're working with any of the tool in kind of the leader or visionary quadrant, it 99.9% of the time it does. But again, I haven't met any executive that's like wanted a very specific tool. So don't stress if you get asked to build something for an executive, what it's based off of. That's really more that it has the format that they're looking for and the frequency of the data. Okay, on that note about data, literally how and why we go and use dashboards, right? We're trying to tell a story with our data. And this point got brought up earlier. People are like, well, here's the data I have, shove it into dashboards. Like, no. Tell me what you want to accomplish. What are we trying to solve? What are we trying to convey? Right? You're really a storyteller through this visualization. And so once you understand the business pain point and how they're going to use it and what they want to see, that's when you can go, all right, here's the data that I need to help tell that story. And you want to make sure that we've captured those fields in that design document as part of your gather requirements. When you go to collect that data, it's really important that you are collecting it from the right sources, right? I've hear time and time again, 3 different analysts will calculate the same metric and it's different. And they have different meanings for the same KPI metric. So work with, if you're at a large organization, they probably have some sort of data governance or data steward or data owner. Maybe you've heard these titles. That person can help guide you as to like, what are the agreed upon meanings of these KPIs and metrics? What sources should be used to calculate those? What data sources should go into your dashboard? And that will, again, just save you headaches as you go into build. Another way you can approach it, if you look at the data right, try to look for those insights, try to aggregate and summarize as much as you can. Definitely don't misrepresent the data set. So this is where you want to take your time to look at the quality of the data that you have before you're pumping it into a dashboard or a report. I wouldn't make the assumption that the data is of really high quality. So take the time to, again, evaluate it, do those aggregations and summarizations, and then try to glean some insights as well as you do that basic analysis. Okay, design principles. There's so much here. There's one person, one group of people I'll mention, because if you've ever studied visualization of any sort, you've probably heard of these people. So Edward Tufte, or ET, is the first one. He's quote unquote like the modern data visualization person. He's, by modern, I mean like 70s. But when he came up with all these principles, as you start to put things in ink and you create graphs, what should you do? He has tons of books, and even though now we're digital, a lot of those are very applicable. Going back even further are the Gestalt, it's German, I'm probably mispronouncing it, but the Gestalt principles. Those were psychologists in the 30s that studied how we look at things, and they came up with these basic principles for design. So if you haven't heard of them, you can go and look these up and read what all of these mean. But it applies to pretty much every human being. When we look at something, how we process it, and understanding these principles will help as you create this nice design. So colors and fonts. For color, there's kind of a couple main things here. There's 3 main aspects to color, right? There's hue, saturation, and value. So the hue is the color, the saturation is the lightness, the intensity, and the value is kind of the lightness and darkness, right? So those are your different aspects of color. Frankly, when creating dashboards, I've never really worried about the aspects too much. Maybe I'll worry about, how light or dark something is, or the contrast, but I've never looked at a color and understood those aspects, but that's what they're all rooted in. The most important thing when you're creating your report of the dashboard is your palette. And so if you're at a large organization, please use the established company palette. Save yourself the time and hassle. They've probably paid someone a ridiculous amount of money to come up with a very specific company palette. And just use that. The colors, everyone's used to seeing it. They look good together. Just use those. If you're at a smaller company and they don't have those things established, there's 2 really helpful resources. There's Adobe Color, and there's a website called I Want Hue. And you can go and play around. You can get all these different schemes and all these different specific Pantones. And it's kind of fun just to play around with. But those are 2 great sources if you're not sure color schemes. What you want to keep in mind with color is that you could be creating something for people who are visually impaired. So for the colorblind, like red and green is very hard to distinguish, and yellow can also be difficult for people. So you want to make sure you pair, light and dark, and you have contrast between the text and the background colors to help folks that are visually impaired, because you're not going to change the color on your dashboard once you publish it, right? It's there, and it needs to work for everyone, and people might not share in your process of creating the report that they are colorblind. So you just want to design with that in mind. You also want to be really cognizant of font. Good rule of thumb is to use one font throughout and have no more than 3 different sizes of that same font. And for those of you that are very astute, I recognize I'm breaking that rule in my PowerPoint. But when doing reports or dashboarding, that's the design principle we follow. Graph title, as a good rule of thumb, should be 2 sizes bigger than any labels. Please don't underline anything. Try to use bold or italics to emphasize your points. Definitely don't bold or italic labels. Again, have that good contrast, and then avoid putting things in all caps. As you can see on the screen, that is very sort of in your face, and we don't need to do that. Our visualization should be able to tell if something is significant and impactful just through good design. Okay, charting, there's so many charts. There's 4 resources here that you can go to if you have no idea where to start to create some nice chart. The graphic continuum will show if you're doing this, go here and do bar chart. If you're going this, do here and do this type of chart. So that's a great resource. Reddit and the pudding just have people that share all their cool visualizations. So it's just really good inspiration. And then D3JS will have your really neat interactive visualizations to take a look at. But no matter what chart you're doing, some basics here is to make sure you label axes. You don't want any confusion. Someone should be able to read your dashboard and be very clear as to what it's saying. You shouldn't have to explain it. So label, don't have the grid lines. It makes it very hard to see. People don't want to calculate things, so just do the math for them. When in doubt, keep it really simplistic. And then again, we want to make sure that it's understandable to someone that might be new. So if you are creating a visualization, a report that's going to go to an external, very broad audience, you may actually create a legend, a key that explains exactly how to interpret each part of the graph and what it means and how to use it. But anyone should be able to read that and interpret. Now, if it's something more for just internal use, you're not going to do that. So you have to make sure, again, your chart is very clear on what it's trying to convey, and where you start your labels and where you start your axes, and if you do or do not label things, it can create confusion, misinterpretation. So I know I'm flying through charting, but it is a really important aspect of your visualization. I'd say some common charts, some basic charts that we see are pie charts. I don't know if we're all just still from grade school in love with pie charts, but don't use them if you can. See if a bar chart works better first. If a pie chart truly is best, keep it maxed to 6 slices and then only use solid color. If you do a scatter plot, avoid the 3D. I always think, kind of a line of best fit is helpful if it's applicable. And then, of course, if you have kind of multiple charts with the same variable and an accent, make sure it's a consistent scale from graph to graph. Maps, keep it focused on the map itself. A lot of times people get kind of like caught up in all the funky, cool things we can do with a map and geography, but you're trying to convey what the data is saying, right? So again, don't go crazy with the map if it doesn't make sense for your visualization, and definitely keep areas colored in a solid. And then finally, if you've heard of like bullet charts, it's that chart there at the bottom where you see kind of revenue. You should make sure that bullet charts go through different states, right? So bad, good, great. You want to have those gradients go kind of light to dark or dark to light. It should be consistent. And then as a best practice, you don't want to have more than 5 different stages within that bullet chart, because then it's just really too hard to interpret. Okay, advanced visualizations. I rarely, for clients and in business context, have to make any really advanced visualization. So by advanced, I mean it's very interactive. You maybe play and it moves. You're probably only going to create this if you're doing something for an external audience. There's typically a lot of data that's going to go into creating it. This is a process. So I know someone asked about, hey, how long does this take? It's going to take you longer to understand the requirements for an advanced visualization, and it's going to take you a lot of iterations to build it out correctly. A lot of wireframing and kind of back and forth. So again, in most business settings, you're probably not going to do this all that often. I think most people do advanced visualizations just because they like it. They find some cool data and they make like a cool visualization to go along with it. And if that's what you want to do, the more power to you. But in general business settings, you typically do not have to create something like this. And if you choose to do this, just know it's going to take really in-depth kind of technical skills, much more than just being like, oh, I'm an expert in Tableau. You're going to have to dig a little bit further. And if you want to see a cool example, I put a link here. This picture is from some old federal budget data. All right, I just flew through that last half. I wanted to be really cognizant of time. So with what we have remaining, I'm happy to answer any further questions that I have.
Cool. So that was really, really informative. I love all the different examples. I started playing with the I want Hue thing already. So while you were talking, really helpful. Stuff I didn't know about. We have one question that I'm going to ask from Juliet. Not sure if she's still here. But what she asked, what do you do when a client desires or anticipates a certain insight, but then when you go through their data, you realize that it's different from what they expected? I'm going to assume the standard, like we have a hypothesis and we're testing it, but how do you kind of either break that news or address those kinds of situations?
I mean, like, that's the beauty of the data, right? Like, it doesn't lie. Like, oh, I thought my sales were really great. I'm like, sorry, girl, did the analysis of the data. Here's what it's saying. And that's why we moved to a more data-driven culture and using some of these tools, right? Because people are making decisions off of hunches and things they thought were true and they really aren't. I think when you're designing a dashboard, I mean, the data is going to tell you if it's good or bad, and then it's really up to the business to decide that's an issue we need to address and try to fix, or we're okay with where it's at. But before you go ahead and publish it, definitely do your due diligence and make sure the data is of high quality, right? What you want to avoid is sharing a negative or wrong result because maybe you had a bunch of nulls in your data or you had an incomplete, data set. So that's where when we are building, when we talked about data, like you take the time to assess it and make sure the data is of high quality before it gets pulled into your dashboard, and that can kind of alleviate things too. But if you check that box and then, this is what the data is saying, I mean, that's now on the business. Just again, be okay with where the result is at, or decide it's something that they want to pursue. But the business should give you, if they're looking for like a threshold, what that is. If they're okay with something being 80% fine, if they're okay with being 50% fine, but they should give that guidance to you.
Yeah, awesome. And then while we give everyone a chance to ask any other questions, let's say we have time for a couple more, and then we'll be done here. But what kind of, like, thinking about like the second half of your presentation, what are kind of like the biggest like mistakes that you often see? How frequently do you see pie charts, or like what, all the time?
Yeah, I don't know why. Again, I don't know where like the love for pie charts came from, but they're so hard to read, and like I don't even think they should be an option. I know it's a little intense, but
no, this is a thing that every data person talks about. I had someone about a year ago who's like, you get one in your entire career, so use it wisely. And so I'm always kind of amused by stuff like that, but it's totally true. It's like, but what other like common things do you see where you're just like, oh, this is terrible, or like, I mean, obviously there's like the basics, like use your company colors, but anything else that you're just like, hey, this is like, I see it all the time, I have no idea why everyone does it, but it's ridiculous.
Honestly, what I see all the time is, like, no joke, thousands of reports being created on a monthly basis. My client now is a fairly small company. Mm-hmm. They have 25 people fully dedicated to creating 1,700 reports a month. And they're all very similar. So, like, as a visualization, as an analyst, like, that's super boring. I don't want to do that, right? Like, I want to teach you to go pull the data that you need. So I see that more often than not, where people are just like, oh, we're just used to producing this report, so we keep producing it. And like it's used by one person, or it's no longer used by anyone at all. So if you get asked to create a report, I would look for like a report catalog, or try to understand if there's something similar already in existence, because maybe what you can do is avoid all this and just say, hey, can we just grant this person access and give them the ability to pull in like additional fields? And you might not have to go through the whole process of planning and gathering requirements and building and iterating and deploying and maintaining. So I see that. I see like the tons of fields all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm not joking when I had the client that wanted 300 fields, and that was like one report, like every report. They wanted tons and tons of fields.
300 seems hyperbole, but what would be like an average, like too many?
Ooh, great question. I mean, I want to, for me, like whatever fits like across the screen.
Yeah.
And like a reasonable font, not like size like 8 font where can't see.
All the things to get it on the screen.
Yeah, or like everyone's looking at stuff on their phone. And so if you're looking at your phone, like there's maybe only going to be like 5 fields that fit across. So that's where you need to create like a nice chart to convey more data. I'm sorry not to give like a very specific answer, but
that's kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, we got a question from James, and he asked about the thought process behind effective dashboards. Is it best to be concise or thorough if you had to choose? I think that depends on the stakeholder, but
concise or thorough? Yeah, I mean, if you're building it for like the executive, it better be both. It better be like real accurate and very concise and to the point. I think where you can, like the tools offer capability if you want to be thorough, right? So I guess if I had to choose, I'd say like be concise, and then if people want to like dig in or know more, that's when these tools can allow you to drill and calculate and change the visualization and pull in fields, and then they can feel more like thorough and the report. Huh?
I said be concise and be accurate, and then if you need to, then be more thorough.
For sure, be accurate. Yeah, that one.
That's a killer, right? Where you buy something and then you realize their data is wrong once, and you can never.
Yeah, I mean, my approach to work life, and I'm just gonna be like very blunt here, is like I just don't want to look like an asshole, right? So I just want to be right. I don't want to give you something That's wrong. You don't want to be in the meeting and be like, where did you get this? How is this calculated? Right. And if you do get asked those questions, like, have the answer.
Yeah. Cool. We've got time for one more question. If anyone has any other follow-ups, we'll give you guys another minute or so while we talk about the things that people do that aren't the best.
I guess as we're waiting, I'll do a shameless plug that our digital lighthouse practice is growing. So if you're, got some experience looking for a new opportunity, please reach out. And also if anyone just wants to like connect on LinkedIn and network, I love networking. Like I said, the onsite always in Chicago. It's a great city to network in. So please, connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. And I'm also happy if you, think of a question like an hour tomorrow. Again, connect with me, shoot me a message. I'll do my best to provide an answer.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, so I've put her LinkedIn in the chat for everyone. So feel free to connect. And then also this talk is being recorded. Earlier I put our YouTube channel. I'll drop that in again as well. But with that, thanks so much, Pauline. This is really good. Thanks, Athena. She also thinks it's really good.
Yeah, thank you, Athena and Juliet. That makes me feel good. I appreciate it. I know visualizations on an evening might not be the most glamorous topic, so thank you very much.
No, there's always like new things that come out, things that like when you don't do this every day, like these new resources you showed us, I think are all going to be super helpful, at least people like me who struggle with design and colors and stuff. So super helpful. So thanks again. And then I hope to see everyone next time.
Thank you. Have a good night.